Kara Dempsey hadn't expected her Saturday morning to involve lifting heavy boxes for a stranger, but then again, she hadn't expected her new neighbor to look like he stepped out of a GQ cover shoot either. "Need a hand?" she asked, brushing a loose curl from her face, as she spotted the man struggling to hold a box with one arm while fumbling for keys with the other. He turned, and for a second, Kara forgot how to breathe. Tall, dark hair, sharp jawline, expensive-looking button-down rolled at the sleeves, and those eyes that locked on hers like he wasn't used to being caught off guard. "You sure?" he asked, voice rough but not unfriendly. "It's kind of heavy." "I work at a bakery," Kara said, stepping forward and grabbing one side of the box. "I carry 50-pound flour sacks. I'll live." He laughed, and it was low and warm. "All right then. I'm Nolan. Just moved in." "Kara. Apartment 2B. They carried the box into his unit 3A. The place looked barely unpacked, but what caught her eye wasn't the mess. It was the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the kind of view that didn't come cheap in Chicago. She blinked, trying not to stare. "You're not from around here?" she asked, setting the box down. "Not really," he said, glancing around. "Been out of the country for a bit. Just bought this place last month." "Bought? Not rented?" Kara nodded, brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "Welcome to the building, I guess." He tilted his head. "You always offer to help strangers move?" "Only the ones who look like they're about to drop a box on their foot." That earned a full smile from him. Kara smiled back, then turned to leave before she said something dumb. But before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Hey, if you're not busy later, I owe you coffee." She glanced over her shoulder. "You don't owe me anything." "Still," he shrugged. "Let me buy you one. Just coffee." There was something in his face, not pushy, just interested. Kara hesitated, then gave a small nod. "All right, just coffee." The coffee turned into dinner 3 nights later. Nolan showed up outside the bakery just as she was locking up, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her rent and holding a single white tulip. "I wasn't sure what flowers you liked," he said. "But this one reminded me of you." She blinked. "You bring flowers to all your coffee dates?" He grinned. "Only the ones I really want to impress." They went to a restaurant she hadn't even realized existed, hidden behind a wine bar with no menu and a chef who just makes something special. Kara tried not to gape at the chandelier overhead or the way the maitre d' nodded at Nolan like he was royalty. "What exactly do you do?" she finally asked as the waiter poured wine into glasses that looked like crystal. Nolan paused, his fingers trailing the rim of his glass. "I run a tech company. We do software design and infrastructure, mostly international clients." "Tech," she repeated. "So you're like a CEO?" He met her eyes. "Something like that." Kara's brow lifted. "Let me guess. The boxes you moved were full of gold bars." He laughed. "No, just books and a very overpriced espresso machine. The rest of dinner was easy." Kara didn't expect that. She thought a guy like Nolan would be all suits and short answers, maybe glued to his phone. But he listened. Asked about her bakery, her dreams of someday opening her own shop. He even asked about the recipes her grandmother taught her. When he walked her back to her apartment, he stopped outside the door and looked at her like he wasn't ready to leave. "I had a good time," Kara said softly. "So did I." His voice dropped. "Honestly, didn't think I would. I don't usually do this." "What, eat food?" He chuckled. "No. Date. Not since." He stopped. "It's been a while." There was a pause, warm and charged, and Kara felt that pull in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She looked away, heart pounding. "Good night, Nolan." "Good night, Kara." The next few weeks were a blur of late-night walks, spontaneous lunches, and Nolan showing up with ridiculous things like a bakery-grade stand mixer after she mentioned hers broke, or a pair of tickets to a gallery opening downtown because, "I thought you might like the colors." Kara kept trying not to fall, but it was hard when he looked at her like she was the only thing that made sense in a world full of noise. Still, there was something he wasn't saying. Sometimes he'd stare out the window too long, or take a call and come back quiet. Once she caught him on the phone speaking another language fluent and fast, and when she asked, he just said, "Work?" Then one night she invited him over for dinner. She made pasta from scratch, even baked a little lemon tart. He showed up with a bottle of wine and a look in his eyes that made her heart skip. Halfway through the meal, she said, "You know, for a guy who just moved in, you don't seem very lost." Nolan sat back in his chair. "What if I told you I've had a place here for years?" She blinked. "Wait, what?" "I bought the unit a while back. Just never lived in it. Used it for business trips. I've got a few properties." "A few?" she echoed. He hesitated. Then quietly, "Kara, I'm not just some guy in a nice apartment." She stared. "I'm the CEO of Jensen Systems. We're global. I'm worth a lot more than I look." Her fork clinked against the plate. "And I didn't tell you," he continued, "because I didn't want you to think that was the only thing worth knowing about me." Kara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You really bought me a stand mixer after one conversation?" He gave her a sheepish smile. "I might have gotten carried away." She exhaled, then laughed, surprised by herself. "You're insane." "Maybe." He leaned forward, his voice soft. "But I meant it. I like you, Kara. Not because you didn't know who I was, but because you saw me anyway." She looked at him, her heart thudding in her chest. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was something real. And that maybe helping her new neighbor carry boxes was the best decision she ever made. "Why does it feel like you're waiting for me to run?" Kara asked, her voice quieter than she intended as they stood together on the rooftop of his building, the city glittering beneath them. Nolan leaned against the railing, his expression unreadable. "Because I've watched it happen before." She folded her arms. "You mean when people find out who you are?" He nodded once. "They either want something from me, or they want nothing to do with me at all." Kara turned her gaze to the skyline. "That's not fair." "I know." His voice was softer now. "But it's the truth." The breeze tugged at the hem of her blouse, and she let the silence stretch between them. The rooftop was far above the noise of the street below, but the tension between them hummed louder than any traffic. "I'm not going to ask you for anything, Nolan," she said finally. "But I'm also not going to pretend like this isn't complicated." He looked over at her, his features shadowed by the dim rooftop lights. "What part of it feels complicated?" She let out a breath, brushing a hand through her curls. "I don't know how to trust someone who lives in a world I've never even touched. You trusted me before you knew anything. That was different." "Why?" "Because then I didn't have to wonder if we even belong in the same story," she admitted, her voice tight. "Now I do." Nolan took a step closer, his tone low but steady. "Then let me show you we do." The tension snapped between them as his fingers brushed hers. It wasn't about the rooftop or the view or his wealth, it was the look in his eyes, like she was the only person in the world who had ever truly seen him. "You don't give up easy," she whispered. "I haven't even started yet." They stayed up there for hours, talking about everything from their childhood fears to the worst jobs they'd ever had. Nolan told her about a boarding school in Switzerland where he once ran away for 3 days just to see if anyone would notice. She told him about the time she tried to sell muffins door to door at age 9 and got chased off a porch by a particularly aggressive cat. It felt like peeling away layers neither of them knew they still had. Over the next week, she found herself seeing him in the small things. He stopped by the bakery before opening hours, bringing her coffee she didn't ask for and sitting quietly on a stool while she prepped dough. He never interrupted, never tried to give advice, he just watched, content to be near her. "You know you're getting flour on your shoes," she told him one morning, not looking up from the mixer. "I own too many pairs anyway." "You say that like it's a problem." He grinned. "It is when they all look the same and I still can't find the pair I need." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're hopeless." "I'm trying to be hopeful, actually." That made her pause. She glanced at him, unsure whether to smile or shut him down. He was getting too good at saying things that cracked her open. Later that evening, she found herself standing in front of a boutique she'd never dared to walk into before. The display in the window held dresses that looked like they belonged on red carpets, not behind bakery counters. She was about to turn away when Nolan's voice came from behind her. "I had a feeling you'd be here." She turned, startled. How did you? I didn't. He held up a small black envelope. But I was hoping you'd say yes to this. She took it, opening it with cautious fingers. Inside was an invitation embossed, heavy, and elegant. Annual Jensen Foundation Gala? She read aloud. Is this one of those things with champagne fountains and silent auctions for yachts? He laughed. No yachts, I promise. Just a lot of people in suits pretending they're more important than they are. And you want me to go? I want you beside me. Kara stared at the invitation, feeling the weight of what it symbolized. It wasn't just a party. It was a statement. I don't have anything to wear, she said finally, her voice uncertain. He stepped beside her and gestured toward the boutique. Then let's fix that. I can't afford anything in there. I didn't ask you to. She opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off gently. I'm not trying to buy your affection, Kara. I want you to feel like you belong there. With me. And if that means walking into a place like this and letting them find you something that makes you feel like a damn queen, then that's what we'll do. She stared at him, heart pounding. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Nolan looked straight at her. Not when it matters. The boutique door opened with a soft chime and an impeccably dressed woman stepped out, smiling as if she'd been waiting for them. Mr. Jensen, we've prepared a few looks as requested. Kara blinked. You called ahead? I had a feeling you'd say yes. She turned to him, torn between rolling her eyes and falling into something she had no idea how to control. I'm going to regret this, she muttered. Only if I pick the dresses, he said with a grin. She followed him inside, her nerves tangled with something else, something dangerous and shimmering and entirely new. The next evening, Kara stood at the top of a marble staircase she never thought she'd see outside of a movie. Her dress shimmered under the warm lights, the fabric hugging her like it had been sewn for her alone. Nolan waited at the bottom, dressed in black tie, his expression unreadable until he saw her. And when he did, the world seemed to stop. He met her halfway and offered his arm. You ready? He asked. She swallowed, her voice barely steady. I have no idea. Good, he said quietly. Neither do I. As they stepped onto the ballroom floor, the crowd parted like they'd felt a shift in the air. Kara held her head high, every nerve in her body alight. She wasn't just his date. She was his choice. The gala shimmered with excess crystal chandeliers suspended from vaulted ceilings, a string quartet performing near a garden of cascading orchids, and an endless stream of servers offering champagne in fluted glasses that caught every flicker of candlelight. Kara moved through the crowd like she'd stepped into a life she never imagined touching. Every stare she received, every air kiss exchanged around them, reminded her how far she was from the bakery's early mornings and flour-dusted aprons. Nolan stayed close, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, guiding her through clusters of executives, investors, and board members. He introduced her with an ease that both unsettled and comforted her. They all knew him. They all watched her. Kara, this is Daniel Marlowe, one of our lead architects for the Berlin expansion. Daniel extended a hand. Pleasure to meet the woman who's finally made Nolan sociable again. Kara shook it, managing a smile. So he wasn't always this charming? He used to leave events before appetizers were served. We're shocked he's made it past the first hour. She glanced up at Nolan, who gave a dry chuckle but didn't deny it. As the evening unfolded, Kara noticed subtle shifts in Nolan. He was gracious, poised, every gesture deliberate, every word weighed. But there were moments, brief flickers, when something colder settled in his eyes. Like when a man in a navy velvet tux leaned in too close and called her a delightful surprise, or when an older woman whispered something in Nolan's ear that made his jaw tighten. What did she say? Kara asked once they were alone on the terrace, away from the perfume, thick air, and clinking glass. Nolan's gaze lingered on the skyline. That I shouldn't confuse distractions with priorities. Distractions? He turned to her slowly. This world doesn't make room for vulnerability. They see anything unpolished as a threat to control. And I'm unpolished, she said, not as a question. No, he said firmly. You're real. That scares them a hell of a lot more. For a moment, the city buzzed below them, oblivious. You used to be like them, Kara said carefully. Didn't you? My father built this company by turning silence into power. He believed emotion made you weak. And you believed him? Nolan hesitated. I believed him until he died, and I realized none of the people at his funeral knew who he was outside of quarterly earnings. Kara exhaled, the pieces beginning to form a picture she hadn't seen before. He stepped toward her, voice lower now. I don't want to be remembered for how much I owned. I want to be remembered for who I fought for. Kara felt his words settle into her like gravity. She reached for his hand, not for reassurance, but to anchor them both. They didn't go back inside. Instead, Nolan arranged for a car and they left the gala early. The silence in the back seat charged but not uncomfortable. When they pulled up to her apartment building, Kara turned to him. You didn't have to leave with me. I didn't want to stay. She looked at him for a long moment. Come upstairs. He didn't move, but his eyes searched hers. Are you sure? I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. The night shifted then. Inside her apartment, it felt different, smaller, warmer, safer. Nolan stood in the center of her living room, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his tie loosened at his collar. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to breathe again. I used to think I had everything, he said, his gaze on her bookshelf. Until I met you and realized how lonely that everything really was. Kara stepped closer. I used to think I had nothing to offer anyone who lived in your world. And now I think maybe your world needs someone who doesn't belong to it. He reached for her waist, slow and certain, and she let him. Later, as they lay tangled on her couch, the city humming beyond the windows, Kara traced the line of his collarbone. You said you didn't want to be like your father, she murmured. I don't, he said. Then don't be. He pulled her closer, his voice rough with something unsaid. I won't. Not if you stay. Kara didn't answer right away. She listened to the cadence of his breathing, the way his thumb traced absent circles against her hip. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. But the following morning brought a shift neither of them anticipated. It began with a knock. Kara opened the door expecting a neighbor, only to find a woman in a tailored navy suit and blood-red lipstick standing in the hallway. Can I help you? Kara asked. The woman's eyes swept over her, unimpressed. I'm looking for Nolan Jensen. Kara stiffened. He's not here. The woman raised a brow. That's surprising. He was seen entering this building last night. I represent the board of Jensen Systems. We've been trying to reach him. Behind her, Nolan stepped into view, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair still tousled. Vanessa, he said evenly. You're early. You're unreachable, she replied. And the board is questioning your recent silence. We need your signature on the Zurich acquisition before noon. I'll be there, he said coolly. You didn't need to come here. Apparently I did. Her gaze flicked back to Kara. And now I understand why. When she turned and walked away, Kara closed the door slowly, pulse racing. Who was that? She asked. Nolan exhaled. My father's former advisor. She's still on the board. Doesn't believe in boundaries. Clearly. I'll deal with it, he said. Don't let her get in your head. But something had cracked open. Kara crossed the room, arms folded. Are you going to keep getting pulled away like this? Nolan's jaw tightened. You knew my life came with expectations. I can handle expectations, she said. I just can't handle being erased. He stepped forward. You're not being erased. Not yet, she said. But I've seen what that world does to people who don't fit into it. I left that world last night to be with you. And this morning, it came right back. Nolan's eyes darkened. What do you want me to do, Kara? Walk away from the company my family built. No, she said quietly. But I need to know that when you're with me. I'm not just a detour. He stared at her, the silence between them stretching taut. Then he turned away. I have to go. And just like that, the door closed behind him. Rain streaked down the bakery's front window the next evening, soft and rhythmic as Kara carefully folded rosewater-scented dough into delicate twists. She hadn't heard from Nolan since he left her apartment. No texts, no calls, no footsteps at her door. She kept her hands moving, letting the rhythm of baking steady her pulse. The silence around her pressed in heavier than usual. It wasn't just the absence of him, it was the weight of what hadn't been said. The bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, expecting a regular. Instead, a tall man in a soaked trench coat stepped inside, water pooling beneath his shoes. "I'm closed," she said without looking twice. "I know," came Nolan's voice, hoarse and low. "I waited until I knew you'd be alone." She didn't turn. "You could have knocked on my door. I didn't think I'd be welcome." She slid the tray into the oven and turned to face him. His hair was slick from the rain, his expression carved with fatigue, not the kind that comes from work, but the kind that comes from knowing you've hurt someone who mattered. "I signed over Zurich," he said. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "The acquisition. I let it go. They'll move forward without me." She crossed her arms. "Why would you do that? I've spent years accumulating pieces of a legacy I never asked for. Zurich was just another chess move to them. But to me." He stepped forward, voice roughening. "It was another excuse not to choose something real." Kara stared at him, her chest tightening. "You think showing up drenched and dramatic makes this better?" "No," he said. "I think telling you the truth does." She held his gaze, silent. "I didn't walk away from you, Kara," he said. "I walked away from a version of myself I thought I had to be. But I didn't realize how much of that version I still carried." Kara's voice was quiet. "And what do you carry now?" He reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, slightly crumpled. He placed it carefully on the counter between them. She unfolded it. Her eyes swept across the page, a lease agreement. For a storefront. Her name already signed at the bottom. "I bought the space across the street," he said. "It used to be an antique store, but the owner's retiring. I arranged everything. It's yours if you want it." Her breath caught. "You're giving me a bakery?" "No," he said. "I'm giving you the chance to build the one you've always dreamed of." "You don't owe me anything. The paperwork's already filed. It's in your name." She stared down at the page, heart thudding. "You listened," she whispered. He stepped closer. Every time. Rain continued to streak down the windows, soft and steady. "I don't want to be something that pulls you out of your world," she said. "I want to be something you choose even when that world gets loud." "I'm not afraid of loud anymore," he replied. "Not if you're standing in it with me." She looked up at him. The ache in her chest cracked open, replaced by something fierce and full. "You hurt me," she said. "I know. You disappeared. I came back." She took a breath. "Then stay this time." He reached for her hand, warm despite the rain. "I was never going anywhere else." Kara stepped out from behind the counter and into his arms. The rain beat harder against the windows, but inside the bakery, everything was still. Later that night, Nolan stood beside her in the empty storefront across the street. The floors were scuffed, the walls faded, and the lights flickered when they turned them on. Kara looked around, eyes wide. "I want to paint the walls soft yellow," she said. "And I want the glass cases to curve, not just be boxes. You'll have whatever you need. I want it to smell like cinnamon and home," she added. Nolan smiled. "Then we'll start with cinnamon." She turned to him. "We?" He slid an arm around her waist. "I'm not just investing in the space. I'm investing in you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're ridiculous." "I'm in love." She froze. He didn't backpedal. "I'm in love with a woman who wears vanilla behind her ears and talks to her dough like it's a living thing. Who sees people before their titles and who never once asked me to be anyone else." She looked up at him. "Say it again." "I'm in love with you, Kara Dempsey." She kissed him slow, steady, like the beating of her heart finding rhythm again. Weeks later, the bakery opened with a line down the block. Kara wore a soft yellow apron and handed out warm pastries with a smile that didn't fade once. Nolan stood beside her, sleeves rolled, laughing with customers and handing out samples like he'd been born to do it. The sign above the door read, "Flower and Light," and beneath it in smaller gold script, "Built with Love." They didn't need chandeliers or crystal. Just cinnamon, soft yellow walls, and each other. Because sometimes the most unexpected love stories begin with a box too heavy to carry alone. The morning sunlight poured through the wide front windows of Flower and Light, painting golden stripes across the pale wood floors and glass display cases. The scent of fresh cardamom buns and orange blossom shortbread hung in the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation from the early crowd scattered across the cafe tables. Kara stood behind the counter, hands dusted with powdered sugar, her curls pulled back into a twisted braid. She was working through orders, but her mind kept drifting to the man currently seated in the corner booth, typing something on a sleek laptop with a half-drunk cappuccino beside him. Nolan had started coming in every morning, claiming the same seat and pretending to work while sneaking bites of whatever she placed in front of him. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding behind meetings or press releases. He was here. Really here. And it still caught Kara off guard sometimes that the man who once ran a global empire now spent his mornings helping her refill napkin dispensers and rearrange pastry trays. She brought over a plate with a warm chocolate croissant and set it beside his laptop without a word. "That's the third one this week," he said, glancing up with a knowing look. "I'm testing a new ganache," she replied. "You're the control group." "I'm honored." She slid into the seat across from him. "Are you still getting calls from the board?" "They've moved on," he said. "Zurich was the last holdout. Once I let that go, they stopped expecting me to come back." She studied him. "And do you miss it?" "Not the way I thought I would." He closed the laptop slowly. "I miss the pace sometimes, the control. But I don't miss the silence that came with all of it." Kara watched him carefully. "You don't feel like you gave up too much?" "I didn't give anything up. I traded it." He reached across the table, curling his fingers around hers. "For this. For you." Her throat tightened. "You're really okay?" "I'm better than okay. I'm building something that doesn't require a boardroom or $1 billion valuation." She smiled, her thumb tracing his knuckle. "You're ridiculous." "Possibly," he said. "But I'm also about to ask you something I've never asked anyone before." Her breath caught. He stood, pulling something from the inner pocket of his coat. Not a ring box, just a folded slip of paper. He handed it to her silently. She opened it. A business license application. 2 names listed as co-owners. Kara Dempsey, Nolan Jensen. Her eyes lifted to his, wide and stunned. "I want to partner with you," he said. "Not just in the bakery. In everything. I want the paperwork to reflect what my heart already knows, that this isn't just yours anymore. It's ours." Kara stared at the form, then at him, and then slowly stood. "You're asking me to marry you with a business license?" she asked. "There's a ring too," he said, pulling it from his other pocket, a simple, elegant band with a small emerald set in the center. "But I figured you'd appreciate the paperwork more." She laughed, the sound breaking free and full of disbelief. "You really don't do anything the usual way." "I don't love you the usual way either." She looked down at the ring, then back at him, heart swelling against her ribs. "Yes," she said, voice trembling. "Yes to the bakery. Yes to you." He slid the ring onto her finger slowly. It fit perfectly. The bakery erupted in applause from the few customers who had overheard. Kara flushed, but Nolan simply pulled her into a kiss that chased away every ounce of tension that had ever lived in her bones. They didn't rush a wedding. Instead, they built their life brick by brick, flower bag by flower bag, until the days formed a rhythm that didn't need perfection, it only needed presence. 1 year later, Kara stood in the back garden of the new Flower and Light flagship location, the spring air thick with lilac and lemon balm. The ceremony was small, just family, close friends, and a few of the regulars who had become part of their story. Kara wore a soft linen dress the color of cream, her curls pinned with fresh jasmine. Nolan stood beside her in a tailored vest and rolled sleeves, eyes fixed on her like she was the only moment that had ever mattered. "You may now kiss your wife," the officiant said, and Nolan didn't hesitate. The kiss was slow, reverent, but filled with years of held breath finally exhaled. Later, they danced beneath strings of lights, laughter echoing off the garden walls. Kara's grandmother cried quietly in the corner, clutching a handkerchief embroidered with Kara's initials. Nolan's sister gave a toast that ended with half the room in tears and the other half in fits of laughter. The cake was layered with pistachio cream and rose buttercream, and Kara had baked it herself. As the night settled into something quieter, Nolan pulled Kara into the center of the garden, away from the chatter and music. He looked down at her, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You once said you didn't know if we belonged in the same story." "I was wrong," she whispered. "No," he said. "You were right to wonder. But we wrote our own story anyway." She leaned into him, her head against his chest. "And it's a good one. The best one." They stood there long after the others had gone inside, wrapped in the kind of stillness that felt earned. Around them, the garden lights flickered like stars caught in branches. The scent of jasmine curled through the air. And in that moment, there were no questions left unanswered. No wounds left untended. Just two people who had found their way to each other despite everything, and who had no intention of ever letting go.